There's been a lot of very rich content in the past panel discussion as well as from the keynote speakers. And particularly we heard from government representatives as they laid out the direction and also the foundation for carbon markets. This panel focuses particularly on carbon credits and brings us to the business side of the discussion, where investment decisions are made, projects are built, and how integrity brings confidence to the market. This is where the rubber meets the road in the implementation of the Philippine-Singapore Agreement. We will hear from both local and global leaders, look at opportunities and constraints, and engage openly with concerns and issues that challenge the global market. More importantly, we want to surface the innovation, partnerships, and best practices that can ensure carbon markets deliver value for climate, for people, and for business. I think that's exciting, and I hope there's going to be a lot of learnings as well, but just as well, hopefully, more commitments after these. We are joined today by executives and experts in different areas of the carbon market life cycle. And because each of the participants, each of the panelists have different expertise and contribution to the market, I'd like to change the format a little bit by asking each of them, as an introduction, a few sentences, maybe for about two minutes or so, introducing both their organizations and initial point of view on the carbon market and carbon credits, if that's okay. So a few sentences to introduce both your organization and your initial point of view.
To everyone, Eric Francia. I'm the CEO of ASEN, which is the renewable energy platform of the Ayala Group. We actually have been on a transformational stage, having started 15 years ago in the fossil fuel fleet of plants, because that's what the Philippines needed back then. But I guess we are the microcosm of energy transition, because 6, 7, or 8 years ago, we started to make that shift from fossil fuel to renewable energy. And it's not only a matter of scaling up renewable energy and divesting coal plants, but equally, if not more importantly, doing the clean transition in a responsible, inclusive, and sustainable manner. And we believe that the early retirement of coal plant is new and innovative, and the linkage to carbon markets is extremely important to enable and scale up and replicate this, and this is what we're all about. So we're very happy to be here. We're very thankful for the support of the Singapore government, our own government, our partners, and it's a whole ecosystem, and happy to discuss the updates and the various issues that we're contending with. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric, and we'll discuss a little bit more of that later on.
So glad to be here, back to my second home in Southeast Asia, the Philippines. My name is Ruben. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Arcadia Technologies. We are a carbon project developer. We also provide the technologies to measure nature-based solutions accurately. At the heart of our business model is to use LiDAR, which is a laser-based measurement system to accurately measure trees, how high they are, how wide they are, and that equates to carbon sequestration. Happy to chat a little bit more about why do we use such advanced technologies for a measurement of the forests. We're also very proud to be involved in 3 different projects across the Philippines, and that's why I come here so often, and it's become my second home, and I love it.
Very pleased to be here. My name is Antoinette. I'm an investment director sitting in Gen Zero. For those who aren't familiar, Gen Zero is a decarbonization-focused investment platform, and we invest across 3 main pillars of nature, technology, and carbon markets. We are firm believers in carbon markets. For instance, we've been partnering high-quality partners like the likes of ASEN, Capel, Mitsubishi, in exploring the use of transition credits in early retirement coal in the Philippines. We're also investors into projects such as like ER projects, which are more like nature-based removal projects. We're also investors in stuff like rice methane reduction projects, which are a little bit more like nature-based reduction projects. So we are firm believers in both technology and nature and reduction and removals. Thank you.
Thank you for having me today. I'm Herman from the Singapore Economic Development Board, and I lead the teams that cover Southeast Asia and Oceania. So you'd be wondering why the Economic Development Board, which is the Singapore government's main investment promotion agency, is here today. Well, we're deeply involved in industry development and ecosystem development in Singapore, and a big part of what we do is with the energy and the chemicals companies. And as you know, they're probably one of the most difficult sort of sectors to abate for decarbonization. But we're deeply involved in that and sort of trying to find that pathway forward to decarbonize that really big sector for us in Singapore. The Singapore Economic Development Board is really sort of looking at how to be thinking with companies and with enterprises to make Singapore that region's lighthouse for carbon services and trading. And it's not just about being a marketplace, but really being a center for innovation, R&D, as well as the trading and the financing that's taking place as well. So we're quite excited about that. And we hope to really sort of be partners with business, with governments like you've heard today, to chart the path forward for Southeast Asia's decarbonization sort of journey, and in line with meeting our own sort of national decarbonization sort of needs and goals. We hope to do so by working with the regional and global partners to really enable a vibrant, trusted, and well-functioning carbon market in Southeast Asia, and supporting companies and their strategies with their needs going forward. So very excited to be here. Thank you very much.
Firstly, thanks to Ambassador Constance, the Makati Business Club, for having me and WWF on this panel, and it's been a really impactful event so far. Quick introduction, so WWF, for those unfamiliar with the organization, is a global conservation organization with over 100 offices globally, and we work in the carbon market and carbon finance in three main ways. First, and primarily this was the traditional role of WWF, is to work upstream with standard-setting bodies to define what high quality looks like from a demand and a supply perspective. And we continue to play that role through board member roles in organizations like the SBTI, as well as the VCMI, the Voluntary Carbon Market Initiative, and the Science-Based Targets Initiative as well. The second way in which WWF interacts with the carbon markets is working with project developers, including the likes of Arcadia, to originate higher quality projects. So WWF has a long history of working with local communities, with local government units, and through those relationships, we work with project developers to originate high quality projects that can stand the test of time and lead to long-term sustainable positive impacts. The third way WWF interacts with carbon markets is by working directly with governments on setting the right policies, regulations, as well as frameworks to originate high-quality carbon projects. And this is both in the voluntary carbon market and creating those frameworks, but also in helping to accelerate Article 6 agreements, whether bilaterally or unilaterally.
So I'd like to move on to the moderated discussion by actually framing them with certain questions, particularly as it relates to your organizations. So we'll start with the market in general, and I'll start with Herman. With the Paris Agreement and the global push for net zero, as we have all seen in the previous panel and speeches, carbon markets are increasingly recognized as a critical tool to accelerate decarbonization. And your organization, EDB, is supporting the development of the broader carbon services ecosystem. So could you share more about Singapore's approach and EDB's in particular on scaling a high-quality carbon market, and where you see the biggest opportunities for collaboration between Singapore and the Philippines that can unlock value for both countries from the business standpoint?
The high-quality carbon market in three ways. First of all, it's creating demand, enabling supply, and then creating capacity and collaboration. So first, on creating demand, there's been a very clear market signal from the Singapore government when we sort of pushed forward with the carbon tax, right? We started out in 2019 at $5, we'll be about $45 by next year, and by 2030, it'll hit about sort of $50 to $80 per ton. And I think that's a very clear signal to the market of where the intention really from the policy side is going to be for the carbon. And we're very serious about that, but the intent is really not to create revenue. There's a misconception out there that we're just sort of taxing companies to line the coffers. What's less known about the Singapore carbon tax regime is that the carbon tax is, and the revenues generated from that goes to a separate bucket. and it's only used for industry to transition, to decarbonize, and all sorts of things that go to technology, to do sort of innovation and all that helps companies to decarbonize, right? And we're very serious about that because, first of all, that really, I think, sends that signal to companies that there will be demand for this, but also a signal to market to reduce emissions going forward, right? And so I think that's a measure of seriousness of intent from the government to do so, to also encourage behavioral change in producers and consumers, and really, at the end of the day, enhance the business case for companies to do so. So that's one important part of it. And also, the government's procuring directly Article 6 sort of credits going forward, and we'll sort of talk about that a little bit later in the year when more details come out. Second is on the supply side, and a big issue that we've found is really particularly on the early stage financing for projects that potentially have a lot of potential to create high quality Article 6 aligned carbon credits. They're not finding the right financing. But we know that this sort of financing is important and very useful to help companies that are in sectors that are very difficult to abate, but they're also very difficult to find globally. So how do we sort of then close that gap, particularly on the financing side? So one of the things that we've done is to come up with this carbon project development grant. And that really, at the end of the day, helps sort of narrow or catalyze the early stage sort of funding and will bring down that sort of cost to start these projects. We've already had 3 sort of grants that have been issued, and we hope to be issuing a couple more going forward. There have been other sort of ways of financing, so Temasek Trust has come out also to unlock potentially more capital and more financing with the family offices, other foundations to avail capital to such projects. So I think, and also, sorry, I forgot this FAST-P, which is the Financing Asia's Transition Partnership. And that really seeks to sort of build up about $5 billion worth of funds and capital that can be unlocked. Again, all of this drives towards helping solve that financing and early stage financing gap in particular, which investors, which some of these companies have said actually is a real problem to solve. So that hopefully will deal with the supply side of the problem. Then there's the last part, which is really the collaboration and creating capacity. So we've launched the Carbon Market Alliance, and that really brings together in a sort of single platform people who are able to supply the high quality Article 6 compliance sort of credits with willing buyers, right? And making that more seamless, making that easier to connect like-minded sort of people in a single platform. And I think that will then enable sort of not just the partnerships in terms of buying and selling, but also the collaborations between thought leaders, between the innovators in that sector. So those are the 3 parts of how we see the carbon market, right? There is creating demand, enabling supply, and then creating the capacity and collaboration. So the second part of your question about what the Philippines and Singapore can potentially sort of collaborate?
Yes. So specific areas where you see specific opportunities on collaboration between Philippines and Singapore.
Yeah, so I think that's already been taking place. One great sort of effort, and we've talked about the ASEAN effort with the transitional credits. I think that's been really sort of good. And that's one example on the transition credits front. The other, I would say, is the opportunities for blue carbon. And the Philippines has an immense sort of resource in that regard. We just launched last week or 2 weeks ago this initiative called Blue Catalyst with the WWF and with Hatch Blue. And this is really sort of leverage on technology to then be brought in to solve some of the blue carbon sort of problems and challenges, right? It could be technology that will help to monitor. It could be verification. It could be other things. But that brings together and leverages technology to then solve a lot of these problems, right? And I think there's tremendous opportunity in the Philippines, not just from that perspective, but also the jobs that will create, the skills that will sort of bring about as well. So all in all, I think that can potentially then help unlock a lot of opportunities for Philippines buyers, Philippines sort of consumers, Philippines thought leaders, and really practitioners in the field to then access this technology, right? And I think that's really important and powerful and potentially really transformative in that sense.
Can you tell us more about this and what have you learned so far in this journey? Although as you move into a multi-year journey for this, tell us what have you learned so far, both in terms of the partnership on the financing side, but also in terms of the impact and support from the communities.
A bit of a context, we started this coal to clean journey in 2021, 2022. We were trying to divest. We were on a coal divestment program within the Ayala Group, but then we decided that we have to do this in a more responsible fashion because just divesting the coal plant doesn't really solve the underlying problem of emissions. So we were first inspired by the concept that ADB put forward, which is the Energy Transition Mechanism, which is really at the heart of it is a financing mechanism to enable an early coal retirement. Coal plants typically last for 40 to 50 years of operating life if you take care of it. And our assumption is, who knows what the future brings, but it's proven that coal plants do last that long. But the economic life, the depreciable life is only 25 years, right? So we said, okay, we can use this ETM structure. We tested it with some of our financing partners like BPI, RCBC, and some insurance companies who were interested in the equity. And we thought we could do it in the Philippines as a proof of concept to test this idea. And that we did. We were able to do it. We cut the life of SLTech. SLTech started operations in 2015. In theory, it could operate up to 2055 to 2065. We said, look, we'll draw the line on the sand. 2040, after 25 years, we will ensure the retirement of the coal plant. And for that, we were able to get low-cost funding, low cost of capital, no subsidies, no concessional financing. This is pure market-driven. And we closed that deal in 2022. Now, however, ADB also encouraged us, but 2040 is far down. If the world is really to attain our 1.5-degree target, half of the coal emissions have to be reduced between 2022 and 2030. It is a very daunting challenge. So we said, look, we can try, but Ayala does not run a charity. We will need subsidy already to further accelerate that by 10 years. And that is why we were very encouraged and thankful that Singapore, through MAS and the Rockefeller Foundation, introduced the notion of transition credits in 2023, in July of 2023, and we signed a cooperation agreement in COP28. So this really gave a rise to this transition credits pilot project, which is very exciting. Now, we are still going through that journey. So we, at the heart of it, we need to keep all stakeholders whole in the coal plant. We will have to pay for the foregone cash flows, the 10 years worth of cash flows. We have to pay the banks, pay the equity investors. We have to keep the community whole, ensure that no one gets left behind, the community, the workers, and we need to do responsible decommissioning and asset repurposing and all that. And secondly, we, as Yusek Wimpy mentioned earlier, we will do the responsible thing of replacing the capacity of SLTech, which produces important energy for the Philippines, with clean and reliable energy. That's why we have to incorporate battery storage and a large transmission infrastructure. And that, even if solar and battery costs are low, because of that transmission infrastructure required, that's the often underestimated item. And that will need some viability gap funding as well. So basically, if you sum it all up, there has to be an economic gap that should be paid for by somebody, and that somebody are the carbon off-takers. And that is why we're glad that there's the sovereign governments who will form part as the off-takers for this. But also last week, I was in New York during the Climate Week. There are very interested big-name corporates also wanting to take this for the voluntary market as well. So it's very exciting, but we really need to scale up the demand. And then next is we need to encourage more supply. This is a long, long road ahead, but we're making good progress, and we're happy to share the learnings.
That's very interesting and very exciting, Eric. But in the panels this morning, we confirmed that there are about 64% of our energies come from coal. So that means there's a lot of opportunity as far as retirement is concerned. Is the supply for the alternative, for the replacement, following? If more of the coal are going to be retired, similar to your experience in SLTech?
It's not going to be easy, Lito. SLTech is just, I computed, it's 246 megawatts. There's about 13,000 megawatts of coal plant in the Philippines. So you multiply that by 50, all right? Now, we're not going to retire all of those coal plants, right? But The challenge that we have is that energy demand is growing, and then add on top of that data center, AI, electrification, and so forth. So we have to do this in a measured pace. We cannot just shut down coal plants and not have a responsible replacement. So I think in the near to medium term, the at-scale renewables are still going to be on the expensive side. But over time, I think as coal plants get older, the economic viability of that reduces. And at the same time, with advancements in technology and lowering of cost, I think in the mid-decade next year, maybe these carbon prices will tighten and the subsidies will tighten. But we cannot wait, right? When I told Department of Energy, we can wait so that the pricing gap will be smaller. We cannot wait. The world cannot wait. And it's important to have a proof of concept for others to follow, and hopefully that carbon pricing will tighten over time.
Which brings us to the next point of view. From an investor standpoint, Antoinette, you collaborated with ASEN on the retirement. From your side, what makes Philippine coal retirement project, and for that matter, other carbon market projects, attractive and promising from an investment standpoint?
Elaborate a little bit in terms of the theory of change that Gen Zero has on this particular project. We believe that without intervention, I think coal will still be a huge part of power generation in Asia, right? And this is driven by two simple facts. One, power demand is growing, driven by economic growth, driven by electrification, AI, data center, and all that demand. And two, the average age of the coal fleet in Asia is young, below 15 years, right? Versus the technical life of 40 to 50 years. There's another 25, 35 years to go. So what do we do? So that's the reason why we're involved, and we think that we need to drive this transition. Then back to the question around why Philippines, why this project? I think the Philippines is very well positioned, right, for a few reasons. One, I think there are very positive signals around regulatory clarity and certainty that's emerging, right? Around, the country has, firm commitments to achieve more than 50% of renewable share of power generation by 2040, right? There's existing coal moratorium since 2020. That's very helpful. There is also recently has been a draft DOE circular establishing clear guidelines around the use of carbon credits in the energy sector. So that's very helpful. And I think we also talked about the proposed Low Carbon Economy Investment Act, which is seeking to institutionalize mechanisms for corporates to chart out their decarbonization pathways. So these are all very positive signals, and we think steps towards the right direction in terms of establishing that regulatory clarity, right? So that's very important from investors' perspective. We need that. While some of these are still not casting stone, right? Still right steps towards the right direction. I think that's what counts. And from a market dynamics perspective, right? Renewable is growing very quickly in the Philippines, right? The sector is maturing very quickly as well. And if you think about the Philippines, right? We think it's probably one of the most practical places to actually do the piloting, right? Because of the liberalized electricity market that you have, because of the momentum on the carbon credit policies that's emerging. So I think that's my second point around the market dynamics. I think the third part is around demand. I think there are very good prospects that's emerging where we see potential for supplying local projects into that Article 6 market. Very important, right? Singapore has set a very clear price and demand signal for Article 6. Our carbon taxes is supposed to rise to $50 to $80 per ton, right? And 5% of that actually can be offset by credits. And because of the implementation agreement that is expected to be signed, we do see strong prospects of some of these projects to actually supply into that market. So the demand signal is there as well. And lastly, I think there has been a very collaborative ecosystem on the ground, right? There's a mix of private investors, private sectors, governments, non-profit organizations contributing actively their insights, right? We have NGOs like WWF, very active in the Philippines and engaged on topics such as benefit sharing and just transition. The government has been extremely supportive. We have also been working very closely with ASEAN through our work on SL Tech. Super impressed by the thoughtfulness in the design of the project, as well as on topics like just transition, right? So I think in summary, a lot of good things that we see in the Philippines, and that's the reason why we're believers in the project.
With all of these opportunities, is there a particular focus area for Gen Zero, for example, to at least to start with in the Philippines? Is it energy, nature-based, or engineer removal, or even methane capture? Is there a preference or focus area for investment?
I do think that this SL Tech project probably will be one of the first projects that we explore in the Philippines. Having said that, we're open-minded to all types of projects. Like I mentioned, we believe in both removal and reduction. We believe in both technology and nature, right? So for us, as long as the projects are able to pass our standard, our bar of integrity, of scalability, we're happy to explore.
We talked about integrity, and this has become the new currency for carbon markets. Based on your global experience, what do you think should be the safeguards in Philippine projects that should be adopted, no? So that they could stand up to scrutiny and attract investors like Gen Zero?
I guess the quick answer would be reflecting on the market. I think what's quite apparent is that there's a clear flight to quality, right? And quality, by and large, in the market is currently defined by projects that are developed in accordance to internationally recognized standards, such as those recommended by the Integrity Council for Voluntary Carbon Markets, the ICVCM, or other standards like the UN Aviation's bodies, ICAO CORSIA scheme. And that's one way to look at it. But equally important aspect of standards is also recognizing that standards are not static. They are dynamic. And part of that dynamism is not that the standard setters are not the only ones that are insisting on a particular standard. And it is the ecosystem coming together to collectively raise the quality on what high quality means. And I'll give you some examples of how that has happened. I think one example, and in the panel earlier, Wei Wei, the director from Singapore's Ministry of Trade and Industry, explained how the Singapore government was directly procuring $60 million worth of credits from nature-based solutions. And those projects come from newly developed methodologies by, in that case, Vera. And there are essentially two options, right? Either you say the methodology is not robust enough, so I'm going to exclude all of those methodologies and I'm not going to buy any nature-based credits, or you take the option of helping to increase the water level. And that's an example of what the Singapore government has done, and they have imposed additional safeguards to the existing methodologies to ensure that the underlying projects have these additional requirements that meet a level of environmental integrity that, in this case, the Singapore government or the buyer is comfortable with, right? And that has an effect on the market itself and how the standards developed. So the second example that we can highlight is, I mean, to draw on the ASEN example, right? As was mentioned in the panel earlier as well, and the speech, that Vera had recently approved the coal transition methodology. And as part of that coal transition methodology, you sort of pass that standard if as long as from an energy replacement perspective, you replace 40% of what used to be generated under coal under renewables. But if you think about it from an energy security and an energy equity perspective, who's going to make up the other 60%? And that's where you have market stakeholders like ASEN to say that, yes, the standard only requires 40, but I am going to do a full one-to-one replacement because energy security is important and energy equity and access is equally important. So I think there's that element of standards, but there's also the equally important element of the ecosystem coming together to recognize that standards are continually evolving and how we can work to meet this higher standard that collectively leads to a higher integrity market.
I think those are very important points as we develop the carbon markets in the Philippines. But to what extent are the business side, which basically the investors and the project owners, for example, are relevant to the creation, or actually maybe the creation as well as the the development of the standards itself. Because right now the standards are global, as we said, from WWF. But how do the private players be part of this developing of standards?
The development of standards, even by established carbon crediting programs, is an iterative process. And I'll share with an example that WWF has been involved in. In Australia, WWF supports a program called Koala Friendly Carbon, which is essentially a land-based restoration program and a carbon crediting program, but it's done in a way that is not only prioritizes carbon, but also prioritizes the rehabilitation of koala populations that were decimated during the wildfires. And it's not just environmental effort or biodiversity effort. There is a clear economic case to do so, because by doing that, the credits generate a price premium, and that incentivizes project developers to do that. And the hope is then that over time, the global standard setters see the value of this more integrated approach and not having a carbon tunnel vision when they come out with their standards, to incorporate them as basic parts of the standards. And when we reach that point, then you have a collective increase of the water level of what the base standard could be.
Can you tell us more about this experience that you have so far? And tell us about, also from a business and economic standpoint, what are your main drivers for coming up with, or for signing this particular agreement with the government of Quirino?
These standards actually proactively seek inputs from the private sector on the development of these standards. And one area that we're big on is bringing technology into the development of projects. Did you know that the vast majority of nature-based projects like reforestation still manually measure the trees using the tape measure? And this is not only at the project level, this is at the country level. Now we are in a climate emergency and time is of essence. We live in a world of autonomous cars. There's no reason why we need to use tape measure to measure trees. And so that's what we do. We employ LiDAR at scale, which is at the very least 10 times faster than any tape measure approach. And obviously, without saying, the accuracy and the traceability is there. The other thing is, one would say, well, it's more expensive. Yes, 10% more expensive. We're not talking about dramatic amounts of money. And by the way, there's aging population in many parts of Asia. And so actually there's not even enough labor force to go measure the trees in our countries. So 10% more, I think we can employ high-tech, advanced technologies for this. And why did we choose Quirino? Well, first of all, Governor Dex, Kua, and his whole team are extremely...
Maybe just give us a little context about the specific MOU that you have with Quirino.
Perfect. Yes, so Quirino, we've got a MOU to do reforestation in their province and as well as conservation. And this actually, at the end of today, we'll be signing a MOA. So we're going from MOU to MOA, Memorandum of Agreement with them. And the reason why we chose to go to Quirino, and actually the vast majority of people actually end up in Mindanao, but we decided to counter position and go to Quirino, not only because it's more accessible for me coming from Singapore, selfish reasons, but jokes aside, when we first met up with Governor Dex and the LGU team, they are phenomenal. They actually thought about this 3 years before we came in. So they had all the mechanisms in place. They had the people, the folks on ground who actually knew how to carry out a project. And they've already engaged the indigenous people on coming together for a project development. And so given that alignment of spirit and vision, we were able to very quickly get on board. And in fact, from the first ever Zoom call to the MOU was just a week. And that was how fast they moved. And that, for me, underscores the urgency of the problem. The second reason is that they also believe in using technology because they started using manual methods 3 years ago, and they realized that it's just impossible. It just takes way too long.
Because you're planting trees, it will take a while before they actually grow and have an impact on the environment itself. And therefore, it will take a while as well before you realize your carbon credits from a financing standpoint. What are your drivers for coming up with this agreement, which is multi-year, and that you don't realize the financial benefits until several years away?
That is true. We are constrained by the laws of, in this case, biology. And we try our best to speed up the growth using good inputs and organic inputs, but we are still broadly constrained. Thankfully, in the carbon world, there is a concept of forward sales. So we can actually sell forward the credits in order to pull ahead these investments to finance the planting of these trees. And the other thing is that because we want to bring down the cost of reporting and measurements to a point that we can do it every year or every other year at the very least, that also pulls in the cash flows on a more continuous basis versus the regular project would credit every 5 years.
Before I ask a question from that has been sent over to us, is there a question from the audience, a live question? For business planning to set their SBTI net zero targets, how would they leverage the carbon offset market to reduce their emissions?
So exactly that, right? So what is currently, so the SBTI had released its version 1 guidance of how corporates could decarbonize, and it adopted a market transformation prioritization approach, right? So corporates had to prioritize their within value chain decarbonization as a priority. Now, currently, the SBTI is working on a version 2.0, which they have consulted on and continuing to consult on. And the focus is still the same. How can companies should prioritize market transformation, because that's where the biggest incentive for corporates is, right? Because you lead to more long-term transformation of practices and eventually the industry and eventually the economy. So that core ethos remains the same. What the direction is moving towards is also recognizing that we are way too late in the climate crisis. We have emitted far too much, and it's not enough just to reduce. We have to remove what we have emitted already to even stand a chance of 1.5 or even under 2 degrees. And for that to happen, removals need to scale up now, not just at 2050, but removals need to scale up now so that they can reach a level at 2050 where we can genuinely, as a globe, reach net zero. And recognizing this, but also at the same time being true to the transformation first approach, the SBTI is now considering how other market-based mechanisms like carbon credits can play a role in helping the removal scale up. So I won't go into too much detail, but there's basically 3 options that the SBTI is considering on how credits can be used as part of the new version 2 standard. But in essence, it recognizes these 2 very critical principles of prioritizing market transformation, at the same time scaling up removals, because that's what the climate needs.
I understand that in the transition credit pilot project, you'll be attracting blended capital for the project. And I know that some financial institutions are prohibited from investing in let's say, coal-fired power plant because it would raise their finance emissions. So I wonder if there's already a resolution to this, or how they can go around this based on, I think, some carbon accounting rules. Some financial institutions cannot invest in a coal-fired power plant project.
The financing will enable the retirement of the coal plant, not to purchase the coal plant to run it for longer. So I don't think that will be an issue. It's really going to keeping the stakeholders, including community and workers, whole, and any gap financing required for the renewable energy replacement. So, but having said that, in the ETM structure, that was an issue. When BPI and RCBC funded coal, they put in financing. They needed a carve out from their respective boards. That's why it's hard, because they bought into the idea that you're funding in order to shut down a coal plant earlier than its technical life. But not all institutions will take that view. But that's for the ETM. For transition credits, it's not an issue.
What types of projects are you currently developing in the Philippines? What are challenges and opportunities in your view? I suppose this is aside from the MOU you have with the government of Quirino.
Yes, projects. One in which we are a developer, that's the Quirino project. Two other projects, the other are where we come in as the measurement and verification partner for these projects. And all of these are a combination of both reforestation, so nature removals, and as well as conservation projects, so the prevention of further emissions. The challenges that we have faced, and Lito, you opened this session by saying that this is where rubber meets the road. We are the rubber, we need to figure out where the road is. And I think the road is not as well defined as we saw in panel 1, but it is being built as we go along. And we want to be part of the process of defining this road, preferably as quickly and as painlessly and as cost efficient as possible. So regulation would be, clarity of regulation is one.
Do recognize that there are a lot of opportunities for the carbon market in the Philippines. There are also some challenges, and we heard from the first panel that there's also that need from the business standpoint for the regulatory framework to be cleaned up and to be more robust to address and to be able to address all the business opportunities that we do have. At the same time, there's opportunity to bring in innovation, particularly technology, for example, in the projects that we are be embarking on moving forward. And as we always say, at the end of the day, this we hope are going to bring back value not only to business but also to the environment and for the communities where we operate. And with that, let's please join me in thanking our panelists for I think, a very productive session. Thank you very much.